Chapter 1: The Dinner of Judgments. When his sister called me a gold digger, I smiled not because she was right, but because the champagne she was drinking was paid for by my company. My name is Isabella Grant, founder of Grant Atelier, the woman they whispered about. She built an empire in silence. They thought I wanted their money, until they saw my net worth printed in Forbes. That's when her laughter stopped and her proposal arrived in my inbox. But back then, I wasn't the woman they'd later whisper about. I was just the outsider walking into the Collier estate for dinner, polite, composed, and fully aware I was stepping into a world that would measure me by everything I wasn't supposed to be. The Collier mansion sat on a hill in Connecticut, its windows glowing like a judgmental gaze from above. The kind of house that carried the weight of old money and older opinions. I adjusted the cuff of my ivory blouse as we climbed the front steps. Calm, poised, unshaken, that was the armor I'd chosen tonight. I wasn't there to impress, I was there to observe. Ethan, my fiancé, squeezed my hand. "You'll be fine," he whispered. "My mom just has opinions." "Everyone does," I said softly. "It's how they express them that matters." The door opened before he could knock. Charlotte, Ethan's older sister, stood framed in the doorway like the guardian of a dynasty. Her pearls caught the chandelier light. Her smile didn't. "So this is Isabella," she said, her gaze scanning me head to toe. "You're smaller than I pictured." I met her eyes evenly. "Only because you're taller than I expected." A pause, then Ethan coughed, trying not to laugh. Inside the dining room looked like it had been lifted straight from a European period film, a mahogany table that could seat 20 chandeliers, that probably cost more than my first apartment, and silver cutlery that could fund a scholarship. Eleanor Collier, the matriarch, sat at the head of the table like an empress in exile. She rose halfway as we entered, then gestured for me to sit beside Ethan. "Welcome, Isabella," she said with practiced warmth. "Ethan tells us you're creative." "I try to be," I replied. "It's part of my work." Dinner began with the kind of politeness that felt like a test. Eleanor asked about my little boutique, and before I could answer, Charlotte corrected her. "It's a small design business, Mom. Mostly accessories." I smiled unbothered. "Actually, we focus on sustainable fashion, small-scale, high craftsmanship." "How charming," Charlotte said, slicing into her lamb. "It must be nice to have a creative hobby, a hobby." The word stung for half a second, not because it was cruel, but because it was lazy. I'd spent years turning that hobby into a multimillion-dollar brand hidden behind a holding company with no trace of my name. But explaining that now would only sound defensive, and nothing offends the wealthy more than the appearance of trying too hard. Eleanor dabbed her lips with a linen napkin. "Ethan mentioned you didn't attend an Ivy. No, I said I went to Parsons." "Oh." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that said, "That explains it." When the server poured more wine, Charlotte leaned forward. "You know, it's refreshing to see someone so grounded dating my brother. Most women he meets only want the Collier name." The air tightened. I set my glass down carefully. "Maybe they just want someone who listens." Charlotte tilted her head. "And what do you want, Isabella?" "Peace," I said. "And perhaps a second serving of potatoes." For a moment, even Eleanor's lips twitched. But the calm didn't last. Ethan tried to steer the conversation toward travel art, anything safe. Yet every topic circled back to status, penthouses, auctions, board memberships. I stayed quiet, letting them talk. People reveal themselves faster when you don't interrupt. Then in the middle of Eleanor's story about hosting a senator, a silver tray slipped from a server's hands and crashed onto the marble floor. Red wine splashed across the tablecloth, blooming like a wound. The young waiter froze, mortified. Charlotte's voice sliced through the silence. "Unbelievable! Mother, we really need to train the staff better." "It's fine," I said, standing before she could continue. I reached for a napkin, blotting the stain before it spread. "Warm water, not soda," I murmured to the server. "It's a silk blend. It'll lift without leaving a ring." The server's eyes filled with relief. "Thank you, ma'am." As I returned to my seat, I caught Charlotte watching me, a flicker of surprise behind her polished composure. For the first time, she seemed uncertain whether I was the kind of woman she could look down on. Eleanor studied me thoughtfully. You know fabrics. It's my job, I said. Charlotte's fork paused midair. And you learned that? Where exactly experience, I replied. And a few mistakes that cost less than an MBA. The corner of Eleanor's mouth curved slightly, almost approval. Dinner resumed, but the atmosphere had shifted. I'd passed the first silent test, and now they were recalibrating. By dessert, the jabs grew bolder. So Charlotte said lightly, "What's your long-term plan with Ethan? I imagine running a boutique doesn't exactly secure your future." I placed my spoon down gently. Neither does judging others at dinner. The table went still. Even the chandelier seemed to hum louder. Ethan cleared his throat. "Charlotte." "No, it's fine," I said calmly. "People often mistake quiet ambition for dependency, but that's all right. Time tends to clear those things up." Charlotte blinked, the faintest flush rising to her cheeks. I didn't gloat. I simply smiled and returned to my dessert. When the evening ended, Eleanor offered me a polite handshake instead of a hug. "You handled yourself gracefully tonight." "Thank you," I said. "It's always nice to meet family." Charlotte kissed my cheek with mechanical precision. "You're braver than I thought, Isabella. Most people wouldn't have handled tonight so gracefully." "Most people aren't me," I replied. As we drove away, Ethan exhaled. "I'm so sorry. They can be difficult." "Predictable," I corrected. "Don't apologize. They showed me exactly who they are. That's valuable information." He glanced at me, half smiling. "You're not angry?" "No," I said, watching the mansion shrink in the rearview mirror. "Anger's loud, preparation's quieter." Back in my apartment above the atelier, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop. The hum of the city filled the silence. On the screen glowed the numbers that truly mattered: steady quarterly growth, upcoming expansion, and one unopened email from Forbes' Women Interview Request feature on sustainable design leaders. I leaned back, letting the glow of the monitor reflect in the glass of wine. Tonight they'd measured me by labels and table settings. Tomorrow the world would measure me by impact. For a moment I imagined Charlotte's voice calling me a gold digger. I smiled again, not bitterly, just with the calm recognition of someone who already knew the ending to her own story. People like Charlotte mistake silence for submission, but I'd learned silence could be a strategy. It gives others enough rope to reveal how small they are. The Colliers thought they'd met a guest. What they didn't realize was that they'd met an observer, one who'd already built her own empire brick by quiet brick. As I turned off the lights, I looked out over the city skyline. Each window shimmered like a story waiting to be rewritten. I wasn't here to win their approval. I was here to let them underestimate me long enough for the truth to become undeniable. And it would, very soon. Because the next time they saw my name, it wouldn't be on a place card or a dinner invite. It would be on the front page of Forbes. Chapter 2: The Whisper Campaign. The morning after that dinner felt oddly quiet, as if the entire city had agreed to keep its voice down, while I replayed every moment in my head. The Colliers' laughter, their polished cruelty, Charlotte's perfect smile hiding every condescending word. It wasn't anger that lingered, it was clarity. I'd learned everything I needed to about their world in one evening, and they'd learned nothing about mine. By noon, the quiet cracked. My phone buzzed with messages from Ethan's friends. "Lovely meeting you last night. You looked stunning. Hope you weren't too overwhelmed." Every text sounded like a condolence wrapped in courtesy. When you translate Collier etiquette, that means you didn't fit in, but were too polite to say it outright. Then came the headline. A friend from the design industry sent it with a warning emoji. "You might want to see this. Is Collier heir dating a gold digger?" The article used a photo of me from the fall gala standing beside Ethan in a simple black gown I'd designed myself. The caption made sure to note that my dress appeared off the rack. The writer, hiding behind an anonymous byline, quoted a source close to the family who claimed I had set my sights on something far larger than love. That source didn't need a name. I could practically hear Charlotte dictating the quote between sips of imported wine. I didn't call Ethan. I didn't text. I didn't need to. His instinct would be to apologize, to defend me, to turn this into a conversation about how unfair people could be. But I didn't survive this long by asking anyone to speak for me, so I went to work. At my Soho studio, the hum of the sewing machines was steadier than my pulse. Bolts of fabric lined the walls, a quiet army waiting for orders. My assistant Lena hovered near the cutting table, clearly aware that something was off. She finally blurted, "You saw the article, right?" "I did." I adjusted the stitch on a pale green silk sleeve. "You're not going to respond, no." Her eyebrows shot up. "If they knew who they were talking about." "They will," I said softly, tying off the thread. "But not because I tell them." She stared at me for a long moment. "You're scary when you're calm. That's the goal." The truth was, the insult didn't sting for long. I'd faced worse judgments before, from investors who thought a woman couldn't lead, from editors who called sustainability a trend, from men who believed charm could substitute for ethics. But hearing the same arrogance from people who'd never built anything, only inherited it, hit differently. It wasn't pain I felt, it was resolve. I opened my laptop and reviewed quarterly numbers, stable growth, 3 new suppliers approved, 1 pending partnership with a textile conglomerate worth $60 million. Numbers don't gossip, they just tell the truth quietly. Still, I knew Charlotte. She wouldn't stop at whispers. By the weekend, the tone of Ethan's texts changed. They grew shorter, hesitant, cautious. When we met for brunch on Sunday, he looked tired, like a man walking a tightrope between loyalty and family. "Would you ever tell them more about what you do?" he asked, pushing scrambled eggs around his plate. "It might help." "Help who, my family?" he said. "They'd stop judging if they understood." I took a sip of coffee. "If they need my resume to respect me, they're not worth the effort." He sighed. "You know Charlotte won't stop." "She doesn't need to," I said, smiling faintly. Every whisper is an echo, it fades faster than the voice that made it. He frowned confused, but didn't press. That afternoon, while Ethan went to visit his mother, I had a different appointment, one with my financial advisor, Marcus. His office overlooked the Hudson sunlight, spilling through floor-to-ceiling windows like liquid gold. "She's digging," I said, setting my phone on the table. "And she's not subtle about it. If she finds Ilaria holding, she might trace it back to Grant Atelier." Marcus adjusted his glasses. "She won't. Everything's clean. Luxembourg trusts Singapore entities layers of protection. Unless you want your name visible, no one can connect you." I nodded. "Good. But invisibility only works if you know when to lift the veil." He looked up. "Are you planning to, eventually?" I smiled, but not for her, for timing. Because I'd realized something at that dinner. Charlotte wasn't malicious because she was cruel. She was malicious because she was careless. And careless people are predictable. 3 days later, Lena handed me a printout. "You're on the guest list," she said. "For what? The Collier Foundation's charity gala." I scanned the list. Charlotte's name was printed at the top, chairwoman. Of course. It was their yearly show of power philanthropy dressed as self-promotion. The perfect stage for her to polish the family image. "Should I RSVP?" Lena asked. I smiled. Definitely. I wouldn't miss it. That evening, as twilight fell over the city, I sat at my desk, surrounded by sketches and spreadsheets. On one screen, production timelines. On another, an email thread from Forbes Women confirming my upcoming feature in Women of Impact. Publication date March, 2 weeks after the gala. Perfect. If Charlotte wanted a story, she'd get one, just not the one she wrote. The next morning, Ethan called, voice uneasy. "You're not going to believe this. Charlotte hired a private investigator to find what I asked." "You, apparently. She thinks you're hiding something, debt maybe, or family secrets." I almost laughed. She's not wrong about the hiding part, just the what. Should I tell her to stop? No. Let her waste her money. It'll make the reveal more satisfying. He hesitated. "Reveal, you'll see." That night, I reread the gossip article. They'd updated it with a quote from a fashion insider. "Grant's designs are lovely, but she's not exactly a player in the industry." I smiled to myself. Not yet. The truth was, I had turned down every interview, feature, and photo shoot offered to me since the start. Not because I feared attention, but because I wanted freedom. When no one knows your face, you can move without friction. Power grows best underground. But I also knew when to bring light to it. The following week, the whispers multiplied. Screenshots from online threads landed in my DMs, people debating whether I was a modern opportunist. One user even posted a paparazzi shot of me leaving the atelier with the caption, "Cute outfit, but clearly not call your money." I almost wanted to thank them. Every insult added fuel to something far more potent than anger anticipation. Because when people underestimate you, you don't correct them. You let them commit to the lie until truth turns into their humiliation. 2 days before the gala, Ethan came to my apartment carrying flowers. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "My mom's worried this whole thing's gotten out of hand," he said. "It's been out of hand since the night your sister decided who I was," I replied. "You're still coming, right?" "Of course." "It's rude to skip a family gathering even when you're the scandal of the evening." He laughed softly. "You amaze me." "I've heard worse," I said, arranging the flowers in a vase. "Usually from your sister." After he left, I stood by the window watching the city glow. Somewhere, Charlotte was likely finalizing her opening speech for the gala, rehearsing her practiced smile, confident she still controlled the narrative. Let her. The beauty of arrogance is how blind it becomes right before the fall. The next morning, I called my PR liaison, Emily. "I need you to reach out to the Collier Foundation," I said, "about the event." "Yes. I'd like Grant Atelier to sponsor their scholarship fund. Anonymous donation, full coverage." She hesitated. "That's $250,000. "Consider it an investment," I said. "In perspective." There was a pause on the line, then a low whistle. "You really don't play small, do you?" "No," I said. "That's Charlotte's mistake." By sunset, the paperwork was done. The Collier Foundation had its new platinum sponsor to be announced during the gala, an anonymous donor. As I reviewed the signed documents, I felt a quiet satisfaction settle over me. This wasn't revenge, not yet. This was choreography, every move measured, every silence intentional. I turned off the studio lights, catching my reflection in the window, calm eyes, unflinching posture, steady breath. That look had carried me through every dismissal, every insult that tried to define me. Lena poked her head into the office. "Everything okay?" "Better than okay," I said. "Tomorrow will be interesting." She grinned. "Planning something?" "Not planning," I said, gathering my bag. "Just preparing." Because I'd learned something long ago, people mistake quiet women for harmless ones. But silence is only dangerous when it has direction. And mine did. By the time Charlotte walked onto that ballroom stage in her crimson gown, she'd still believe she was the star of the evening. She'd smile for cameras, deliver her rehearsed speech, bask in the applause of her peers, and then she'd thank her sponsors, including the mysterious company whose name she didn't recognize, whose money she didn't question. Grant Atelier. The words would roll off her tongue like any other brand. But that single moment would change everything. Because in the space between her confidence and her ignorance, my revenge would begin. Chapter 3. The Charity Gala. The night of the Collier Foundation Gala began with rain, the kind that doesn't fall hard, just enough to blur the edges of the city lights. I'd always liked nights like this. They made the world look softer, like a painting smudged at the corners. But tonight's softness wasn't what I needed, precision was. The ballroom was one of those historic landmarks people rent not for charity, but for spectacle. Vaulted ceilings painted with cherubs, gold trim, glinting against crystal chandeliers. Marble floors polished until they looked like glass. Cameras flashed the moment Ethan and I stepped out of the car. He straightened his tie. I adjusted the cuff of my gown, a dark sapphire silk minimalist cut in my atelier. I designed it the way I designed my revenge, elegant, subtle, impossible to forget once seen. "Smile," Ethan whispered. "They'll assume you're nervous if you don't." "I'm not nervous," I said, scanning the crowd. "I'm studying the ecosystem." Inside, the air was thick with perfume and pretense. Waiters floated past with trays of champagne. At the far end of the room, Charlotte stood near the stage, encircled by admirers, a queen holding court. Her crimson gown was bold, dramatic, deliberate. The same could be said of her personality. We checked in at the registration table. The volunteer smiled politely and handed us 2 gold-embossed place cards. Ethan's read Table 3. Mine Table 12. A subtle demotion. A social move as precise as it was petty. Charlotte approached before I could comment. "Isabella," she said, voice bright enough to cut glass. "You made it." I did. Her eyes flicked over my dress. "Sapphire suits you. Local designer." "Something like that," I said. "It's from a collection I helped create." Her smile flickered. "Of course. How charming." She leaned in, lowering her voice. "I'm glad you came. I know it can be intimidating being around people with real influence." I met her gaze, calm and level. "Influence doesn't intimidate me. It reveals character." Her expression wavered just for a breath before the polished smile returned. "Enjoy the evening, dear." We took our seats. My table mates were the kind of social orbiters who lived off proximity, a banker's wife, a gossip columnist, 2 minor donors desperate for photo ops. They spoke about ski trips and trust funds. I listened, nodded politely, and learned more in 10 minutes than most people reveal in hours. Across the ballroom, Charlotte glided through conversations, radiant under the spotlight. When the lights dimmed and the music softened, the charity director stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Tonight we celebrate generosity, compassion, and the power of giving." Applause rippled through the room. Then Charlotte took the microphone. "This foundation has been the heart of our family's legacy," she began smoothly. "And tonight I'm proud to announce that through our sponsors' generosity, we've surpassed all previous records." She gestured to the massive banner behind her listing sponsor logos, luxury brands, hedge funds, real estate firms, and there at the bottom in clean gold serif, Grant Atelier. The sound of my company's name slid through the air like a secret finally set free. My fork paused midair. Ethan leaned closer, whispering, "That's you?" "Apparently so," I murmured. Charlotte smiled obliviously. "And of course, a special thank you to Grant Atelier for their unexpected contribution. It's not every day a boutique business steps up in such a major way." I took a sip of champagne to hide my smile. The word boutique hung in the air like an insult dressed in silk. Applause erupted. I clapped with everyone else, each slow movement a private punctuation mark. The irony was delicious. She had just publicly thanked the woman she'd spent weeks accusing of being a gold digger. Dinner followed. The conversation at my table turned predictably hollow. A woman in pearls leaned closer. "So, Isabella, tell us about your work. You design scarves, right?" "Among other things," I said gently. Charlotte, seated at the next table, overheard. "She runs a charming little studio downtown," she said with a laugh that could slice glass. "It's adorable," the table tittered. The word adorable hit like a slap, disguised as affection. I set my napkin on my lap and met the woman's curious eyes. "It's more than a studio," I said calmly. "We partner with artisans in 6 countries. Our last collection sold out in 48 hours. Charlotte froze, her fork hovering midair. "Oh," said the woman, "how wonderful." "Thank you," I said. "Good for the planet, too." The laughter that followed wasn't directed at me this time. Charlotte looked away, her smile brittle. Halfway through the entree, the coordinator rushed to the stage, whispering something into her ear. The color drained from Charlotte's face for the briefest moment before she composed herself and returned to the microphone. It seems she began voice tight but measured that one of our primary donors had to withdraw unexpectedly, but I'm confident we'll still reach our fundraising goal. Murmurs spread. It was the kind of social crack that could ruin an entire evening's illusion. The Collier reputation thrived on perfection, and perfection did not allow for missing checks. Ethan leaned toward me. "This isn't good." "No," I said softly, swirling the champagne in my glass. "But it's educational." 15 minutes later, the same coordinator returned, whispering again. Charlotte blinked, stunned. When she stepped back up to the microphone, her voice trembled slightly before she caught herself. "I've just been informed," she said, "that an anonymous benefactor has replaced the lost donation and increased it by 50%. The room erupted. Applause camera flashes, a renewed glow of admiration. Charlotte's relief was almost tangible. She beamed every inch the graceful hostess once more. "We are deeply grateful to this mysterious donor," she continued. "Their generosity ensures our programs will continue for years to come." At table 12, I lifted my glass. "To anonymous generosity," I whispered. Ethan turned to me, smiling. "That was you, wasn't it?" I tilted my head slightly. "Technically, it was the company's charitable fund." When the orchestra resumed, I excused myself to the powder room. On my way back, I passed a group of women whispering near the bar. Whoever that donor was, one said they saved Charlotte's reputation tonight. "Grant Atelier," another murmured, scanning the program. "Never heard of them." "You will," I said quietly as I passed my reflection trailing behind me in the mirror-lined hallway. Later, as guests mingled and the band played its final set, Charlotte approached me near the floral display, a cascade of white orchids that looked almost too perfect to be real. Her expression was composed, but I could see the tension in her jaw. "Whoever that donor is," she said, "they saved the night." "I'm glad," I replied. "It's a worthy cause." "You wouldn't happen to know them, would you?" I smiled. "Maybe. Philanthropy circles are smaller than people think." For the first time, her voice faltered. "You're full of surprises, Isabella. So I've been told." She held my gaze for a heartbeat too long before excusing herself to greet another guest. When she turned, I caught a glimpse of something unfamiliar in her eyes, doubt. "Ethan found me later near the coat check." "You were incredible in there," he said. "You didn't even flinch." "I didn't need to." "You know what I mean." He took my hand. "You kept your dignity while they lost theirs." I smiled faintly. Dignity is like silk, strong but easily stained. That's why I protect it carefully. As we left the ballroom, the night air felt different, cooler, cleaner, as if the city itself had exhaled. I looked up at the sky. The rain had stopped leaving behind a sheen on the pavement that mirrored the glow of the streetlights. In the car, Ethan checked his phone. "You're going to like this," he said. He showed me a breaking headline: "Mystery Donor Saves Collier Gala After Major Withdrawal." The subtext: "Who is the elusive Grant Atelier?" I chuckled. People love mysteries more than truths. Let's give them one worth chasing. The next morning, the society columns were glowing. "A triumph for the Collier family. Chairwoman Charlotte Collier dazzles at annual charity gala. Record-breaking donations secure Foundation's future." Every article praised Charlotte's grace and leadership, but buried at the bottom of one column, I found what I was waiting for, a single line that read, "Special thanks to luxury brand Grant Atelier for their extraordinary support." They didn't know the name, but soon they would. I closed the paper, poured my coffee, and smiled. Power doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly in the form of a check with no signature and a silence that unsettles the loud. By noon, another story appeared, this time online. A gossip columnist posted a blurry shot of the sponsorship board zooming in on my company's logo. The caption read, "Who is Grant Atelier and why did they appear out of nowhere?" I let the question hang in the ether. It was the perfect beginning to the ending I'd been writing since that dinner on the hill. Across town, Charlotte would be reading the same piece, her coffee going cold, as she realized something she hadn't before she was no longer the author of this story. The narrative had changed hands, and I had written every line. Chapter 4. The Forbes Revelation. 2 weeks after the gala, the city felt like it had finally caught its breath. The news cycle had shifted to other stories: a celebrity divorce, a real estate scandal, the usual distractions that made people forget last week's gossip. But inside my apartment, silence hummed with anticipation. I knew something else was coming, something louder than rumors and sharper than whispers. It arrived at dawn in the form of a phone call. "Ms. Grant," a crisp voice said on the other end. "This is Olivia Carter from Forbes Women. We're finalizing our Innovators and Ethical Luxury issue, and your feature is going live tomorrow. Just confirming approval for publication." I blinked against the morning light spilling through the blinds. "Everything's in order," I said calmly. "You have my full permission." "Congratulations," she added. "It's a stunning piece. You'll be proud." "I already am," I replied, smiling. When I hung up, the silence of my apartment shifted. It wasn't empty anymore, it pulsed with the energy of inevitability. I walked to the window, watching the Hudson shimmer in pale morning light. The city moved as it always did, oblivious, hurried, self-involved, but I knew that by this time tomorrow it would know my name. The timing was poetic. 2 weeks after the gala, 2 months after that dinner. A year's worth of quiet patience compressed into one perfect headline. At noon, Ethan called. "Dinner tonight," he asked. "My mom wants to host." She said it's time to make peace. "Peace," I repeated, letting the words sit on my tongue. "That sounds civilized." "She means it," he said. "Charlotte will be there too." I expected nothing less. The Collier estate looked softer this time, still grand, still gleaming, but no longer intimidating. Maybe it was me who'd changed, or maybe I just stopped caring how they measured me. When Eleanor opened the door, her face carried a warmth that hadn't been there before. "Isabella," she said, almost affectionately. "You look lovely." "Thank you," I said. "It's good to see you again." Charlotte stood by the fireplace, arms folded. Her dress was navy, understated, a costume of humility. For once, she didn't greet me with a smile sharp enough to draw blood. We sat for dinner. The table was smaller tonight, the lighting dimmer, the air lighter. Eleanor asked polite questions about travel and design, the kind that carried no hidden blades. Ethan looked visibly relieved. For the first time, this house didn't feel like a courtroom. Halfway through dessert, Eleanor turned to me. "Your company's donation made such a difference," she said. "We'd love to meet the people behind Grant Atelier someday." I smiled. "I think you already have." Charlotte's fork paused midair. "What do you mean?" I looked at her, serene. "You'll find out soon enough. Tomorrow morning, actually." She frowned. "Is this about that magazine feature you mentioned months ago?" "Something like that." Ethan gave me a curious glance, but I didn't elaborate. There was power in letting silence walk a few steps ahead of truth. When I left that night, Eleanor hugged me genuinely this time. Charlotte didn't say much. She didn't need to. The story was already written. She just hadn't read it yet. The next morning, my phone buzzed before sunrise. Dozens of notifications flooded the screen, messages, mentions, articles. Forbes had published the feature. The silent force behind sustainable luxury, Isabella Grant, founder and CEO of Grant Atelier. The photo on the cover showed me standing in front of our Paris flagship, tall, composed sunlight spilling across glass and silk. The headline stretched bold across the page, elegant and final. The article was everything I'd hoped for, measured, intelligent, exact. It detailed how I'd founded Grant Atelier at 29, built it into a global brand focused on sustainability, and recently sold a majority stake to a European conglomerate, valuation $85 million. It even mentioned delicately a significant anonymous contribution to an educational foundation earlier this year. By the time I finished reading, my phone was already vibrating again. "Ethan, you're on the front page of Forbes," he said, his voice half shocked, half proud. "I heard. Charlotte saw it," he continued. She spilled her coffee." I laughed softly. "I hope it didn't stain." He exhaled. "She's in damage control mode. Mom's thrilled, though. She said she always knew you were driven. That's one word for it." Within hours, the story spread everywhere: LinkedIn, business journals, social media. Reporters tagged me. Fashion sites called me the future of luxury sustainability. Investors emailed congratulations. People who'd ignored me for years suddenly remembered my number. And somewhere in Connecticut, I imagined Charlotte sitting at her marble kitchen counter, scrolling through the article again and again, trying to reconcile the woman she'd called a gold digger with the one Forbes had just named an industry visionary. That afternoon, my assistant forwarded an email. "From Collier Foundation, subject partnership inquiry." Dear Ms. Grant, we would be honored to collaborate with Grant Atelier on future philanthropic initiatives. I smiled. Charlotte moved fast when cornered. Not an hour later, another message arrived, this one from Charlotte herself. Lunch, we should talk. Siva. The cafe she chose was one of those quiet, minimalist places where the wealthy pretend to be casual. She was already there when I arrived, nursing an untouched cappuccino. Her navy suit was impeccable, her expression controlled. You could have told us she began skipping pleasantries. I could have, I said, sliding into the seat across from her. But you seemed so certain of who I was. I didn't want to interrupt. Her eyes flickered. That article she started, then stopped. You're worth more than your family's company, I finished softly. Probably. But worth isn't about numbers, Charlotte. It's about behavior. For a moment she looked as if she might argue. Then something shifted in her eyes, realization, maybe even respect. She picked up her spoon, stirring the coffee she'd never drank. It clinked against the cup, a small sound that felt like the breaking of old arrogance. Her hand trembled slightly, the spoon chiming against porcelain, a tiny bell marking the death of her certainty. You played this perfectly, she said quietly. I didn't play, I replied. You did. I just declined to participate. Outside, snow began to fall, flakes soft and slow, settling on the window like punctuation marks to the silence between us. I was wrong about you, she said finally. I know. It wasn't cruel, just honest. We sat there a moment longer, the space between us filled with the sound of rain melting into snow. When I stood to leave, she didn't stop me, just nodded once, almost respectfully. A week later, Eleanor invited me for tea. This time, there were no servants, no silver trays, just two women sitting across from each other in a sunlit conservatory. She poured the tea herself. I owe you an apology, she said simply. I let assumptions speak louder than fairness. You didn't deserve that. I appreciate that, I said. But forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's just understanding what led us there. Her lips curved into a small, tired smile. You remind me of myself years ago, before I learned to measure people by last names. As we talked, my eyes drifted to a side table where a magazine lay open. The Forbes issue, my face folded neatly in the center. It wasn't displayed, just left there, visible enough to acknowledge. That small gesture meant more than any apology could. When Ethan arrived later, he teased Mom just subscribed to Forbes Women. Eleanor smiled. If I'd known my son would choose such an extraordinary woman, I'd have prepared better questions at dinner. I laughed. Perhaps next time I'll bring my accountant. That night back in my apartment, I opened my inbox. Dozens of new opportunities waited, collaborations, partnerships, invitations. But one email caught my eye. From Charlotte Collier, subject proposal, Isabella. I've been reviewing potential sustainability partners for our retail group. I believe we could collaborate. Would you consider meeting C? I rate it twice. Not out of triumph, but out of something gentler. Growth. Because humility, when earned, is its own kind of grace. I replied, happy to discuss. Let's ensure it aligns ethically first. Later that evening, Marcus called. You've seen the markets? No, I said. Why the Collier Trust is restructuring. Their board's looking for fresh leadership, someone who understands innovation. Your name came up? I smiled faintly. How poetic. The next morning, a journalist called for a comment on the Collier family's relationship with the woman they once dismissed. I have no comment, I said, voice steady. The story speaks for itself. And it did. Because revenge done right doesn't need narration. It's self-explanatory, like light breaking through a closed window. You don't announce it, you just let it shine. As I set my phone down, the first printed copies of Forbes arrived at the atelier. My staff gathered around, excited, proud. Lena handed me a copy. You did it, she said. No, I replied, running my hand over the glossy page. We did it. That night I placed the magazine on my desk beside the old gossip clipping, the one that had called me a gold digger. Side by side, they told a story of transformation, insult to evidence, judgment to truth. I poured a glass of wine and looked out over the skyline, the city lights stretching like constellations of consequence. Somewhere out there, Charlotte was learning the difference between silence and submission, between arrogance and grace. And maybe for the first time in her life, she understood that some women don't need to raise their voices to change a room. They just need to show up and let the facts do the talking. Because in the end, that's what real power looks like. It doesn't roar, it reveals. Chapter 5. The Dinner Reversal. A year has a way of blurring sharp edges. What once felt like a wound eventually becomes a scar still visible but no longer painful to touch. For me, the year after Forbes was quiet in the best possible way. No scandals, no whispers, no need to prove anything. Just the hum of steady work and the luxury of peace. Grant Atelier expanded to 3 new cities, Milan, Paris, and Tokyo. Our stores were temples of subtlety, pale stone glass and light, the kind of beauty you notice only when you slow down. Our staff doubled, our profit tripled, and my days became a rhythm of creation and calm. Ethan and I married in an early spring beneath magnolia trees that bloomed like silk against a clear blue sky. The ceremony was small, private, elegant, the opposite of everything his family once valued. Charlotte came wearing navy instead of crimson, humility instead of performance. Eleanor smiled through tears. And when Ethan slipped the ring on my finger, I thought of that first dinner, of how far silence had carried me. A few months after the wedding, Eleanor called. "We'd love to have you both for dinner," she said. "It's been too long since the family's been together." For a second, I almost laughed. The symmetry was perfect. The same house, the same table, the same family, only everything was different now. When we arrived, the Collier estate no longer intimidated me. It felt smaller somehow, like the ghost that once haunted it had been politely escorted out. The front door opened, and Eleanor greeted us with genuine warmth. "You look radiant, Isabella," she said, hugging me. "Marriage suits you." "Thank you," I said. "It's good to be back." The dining room was exactly as I remembered, long mahogany table chandeliers glittering like memory. But the energy had shifted. The air that once felt heavy now carried laughter, curiosity, and something dangerously close to affection. Charlotte sat near the window, a copy of Forbes folded beside her wine glass. I recognized the issue, the anniversary edition, Women Who Changed Modern Business. My photograph was smaller this time, tucked among a collage of innovators, but it was enough to catch the light. She looked up as I entered. "I read the article," she said softly. "The part where you said success isn't about proving people wrong, it's about building something right." That stayed with me. I smiled. It's true. Proving people wrong gives satisfaction. Building something right gives purpose. Eleanor joined us wearing a simple pearl brooch instead of diamonds. "I've been following your Morocco project," she said. "Those cooperatives for women artisans, remarkable work. It's a shared effort," I said. "We just give them the tools to be seen." As dinner began, I noticed the small details that once stung, the monogrammed napkins, the endless silver now felt like part of a different story, a background, not a battlefield. Ethan reached for my hand under the table. His thumb brushed my ring, a silent reminder, we survived this. And we did it our way. Halfway through the meal, Charlotte set down her glass. "I've been restructuring our retail chain," she said almost shyly. "We're trying to make our supply chain more sustainable. Maybe your team could consult." "Of course," I said, warmth in my voice. "I'd be happy to help." It wasn't victory, I felt, not the sharp, exhilarating kind. It was something gentler, deeper, the quiet satisfaction of watching someone evolve. She hadn't lost. She'd learned. When dessert arrived, lemon custard with burnt sugar topping, Ethan raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he said. "And to the woman who taught me that grace can be sharper than pride." Laughter rippled through the room. Even Eleanor's eyes glimmered. To Isabella, she said, "For reminding us that class isn't inherited, it's earned." The crystal glasses clinked together, their sound delicate and lingering like the final note of a symphony. After dinner, I slipped out onto the terrace. The night was cool, scented with jasmine. The garden stretched before me, moonlight spilling over trimmed hedges and marble statues. I remembered standing in this exact spot a year ago, feeling like an intruder in someone else's story. Now it felt like mine. Charlotte joined me after a few minutes, her expression softer than I'd ever seen it. You know, she said, I used to think silence meant weakness, that people who didn't defend themselves had nothing to defend. And now I asked. Now I see it can mean strength, she said quietly. The kind that doesn't need to prove, only endure. I smiled. It took me a long time to learn that, too. The difference is I learned it before I met your family. She laughed a genuine sound this time. Fair enough. We stood together in the moonlight, the air between us no longer heavy but human. Then she turned to me, her voice low. You were right all along. I wasn't right, I said gently. I was just underestimated. Inside, I heard Ethan's laughter, warm, easy, real. The sound filled the house in a way that made it feel alive again. Before we left, Eleanor handed me a small silver box. A gift, she said. From the Collier women to the newest one. Inside was a bracelet, minimalist, refined, engraved with 3 words, grace over gold. I looked up at her. It's beautiful. It reminded me of you, she said simply. As we drove back to the city, Ethan reached across the car and intertwined his fingers with mine. The headlights painted fleeting lines of light across the dashboard. You changed them, he said quietly. You didn't just prove yourself, you changed them. Maybe, I said. Or maybe they just needed a mirror. He smiled. You're still too humble for your own good. Humility's underrated, I said. It ages better than pride. When we reached home, I walked into my studio, the same space where all of it began. The air smelled faintly of fabric dye and jasmine tea. On my desk lay 2 clippings side by side, the old gossip article titled Gold Digger or Opportunist, and the Forbes cover that read, The Silent Force Behind Sustainable Luxury. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the 2 versions of myself, the one they imagined and the one I became. Then I smiled, folded the gossip article neatly, and locked it in the drawer. Some trophies aren't meant to be displayed. They're meant to be remembered, the quiet kind of proof that no headline can erase. I poured a glass of wine and stepped out onto my balcony. The city stretched below, a constellation of stories, some cruel, some kind, all inevitable. Somewhere another woman was being doubted, dismissed, underestimated. Somewhere another Charlotte was laughing too loud at someone else's dreams. I hoped she'd meet her own reckoning. Not through anger, but through grace. Because revenge isn't always about retribution. Sometimes it's about reflection. I took a slow sip of wine, watching the skyline shimmer. A breeze stirred my hair, carrying the hum of distant traffic and a faint echo of laughter from the street below. If this were a movie, the camera would pull back now. The woman on the balcony, the city sprawling behind her, her eyes steady but kind. Not a queen, not a victim, just a woman who learned that silence can be louder than any accusation. And if there was one truth worth keeping from all of this, it was this: revenge isn't fire. It's light. The kind that shows who you truly were all along. Sometimes that light blinds the people who once stood above you. Sometimes it guides them. But either way, it burns quietly, beautifully, endlessly. If this story reminded you that grace can be stronger than pride, share it. Because the best revenge isn't rage or victory, it's quiet proof and the life you build after the noise fades.